The lower 3%.
With the alternative schools, is a possibility of GED also successful?
That's COVID.
Yeah, that's a really good question. We're not exactly sure because, the statute's pretty clear that it says, there's a lot of gray area in the statute. The statute, which when we developed our consolidated state plan, which had to be approved by the Department of Ed, we tried to work with that alternative school definition, and we were told, no, it says all public high schools, and it specifically mentions graduation rate. So we're kind of bound by that, but like you said, there are indicators within there are elements within that we're still trying to, I guess, work through details there.
Because state law also states that a GED is a high school diploma, so you've got to, I think it'll weave that in there somehow potentially by law.
Well, I can just speak from our perspective and being in the high school as well, is as long as it's by the cutoff date, it's anyone, say at Ogden High School, that was a part of our cohort that got a GED, if it made the deadline of the cohort group, it's included in our graduation rate. Same for alternative school, George Washington, that's how it's always been. So
that's good news.
The GEDs are automatically, but it has to be during that time period that's allotted for us to calculate it. If it happens afterwards, it doesn't get to count towards us.
I don't want to increase the size of your cohort, however, are your youth in custody sites classified as part of your alternative high school definition?
They're included in the definition of public high school.
Right, okay, so they are included in the cohort.
Yes, and there are a couple that we're identifying.
Okay.
So for us, because we've separated our youth in care,
Youth in care.
because Manos Peak is now its own site,
Right.
they would be eligible for
Okay.
this in the future.
Good.
Because they're not part of George Washington anymore.
Good, it should be that way, thank you.
Yeah, we're hoping it'll be more meaningful discussions about improvement.
Good, need to.
So the next category is targeted support and improvement, or TSI. This is more of an LEA run improvement. It's to raise awareness of student groups. So schools are identified as having one or more student groups that are achieving in the lowest 5% for 2 consecutive years. Lowest 5% of Title I schools, I believe. So we identified 330 schools that have student groups that fall into that category. So the student groups are students with disabilities, economically disadvantaged, the race and ethnicity, English learners. Okay, so some schools may get four categories for TSI. So generally it's students with disabilities, English learners, Hispanic. And so the idea is that LEA is leading and looking into a needs assessment and root cause analysis and creating a plan that they manage to provide growth for those student groups. To exit, they'll have to no longer have student groups performing below the percentage of points associated with lowest performing 5% of Title I schools. The list of schools is there on the website. This is another new one that is causing, of course, a lot of questions and interest and also concern. So we're on that journey as well, and just working to keep people, focused on what the true intent is, which is to just shed some light on those gaps that are in their schools for those student groups. We're planning lots of meetings and discussions in person. These folks, because clearly a letter being sent out and the phone calls that we've been making aren't enough. So we're going to continue on that journey. So your help in sending folks to us when they have questions and not maybe igniting more stress and confusion about it is appreciated. Any questions about TSI? Yes.
So what happens if they don't exit this? What's the end
question.
outcome? Because it kind of feels like the old-fashioned nickel-B AYP. It's like we have our student groups, we're identifying them,
Right.
but 303 schools.
For Title I schools, if they do not exit, then they are raised up into the category of CSI.
Okay.
And so then we become more involved, their plan needs to be improved. And at the end of that, the consequences are a bit like the turnaround. In other words, it goes to a review panel and recommendations are made and that list of more rigorous interventions, is how it's phrased, come into play. You're welcome. For non-Title I, we're gonna yell louder and slower. No, we're still working on that. The consequences for that. So.
Can I ask a graduation question? Can I ask a graduation?
Sure.
I apologize. So we're trying to raise these graduation rates. Is there concern about the legislation that was passed that loosened up the truancy? You could have law enforcement that we're going to have an increase or a decrease in graduation rates this year that might impact this.
I would assume that will come up in discussion with alternative schools. Any other input on that?
Yes.
May I ask a general question about this, both the state level and our ESSA group? Is there a way that educator effectiveness, both in our work at the USBE level as well as Title IIA, can help talk about grading funds, using the support available? Is that part of the conversation with, I would imagine it's mentioned. I'm wondering if there is more support that could be provided.
We'd love to discuss that.
Yeah, that's a great question and comment, Jeannie. We're having our Title I directors meeting on March 15th, and one of the things that our team is going to be presenting is based on a presentation the U.S. Department of Education did at the National ESEA Conference that was held the last week of January. And that is looking at, here's this child in the middle, and that child might be touched by Title I funding, Title III funding, Title II funding, Title IV-B funding, special education funding, maybe migrant funding. So we're going to start talking to LEAs about that, the importance of braiding their funds, leveraging all of their funds, having a coherent, continuous improvement process, and then leveraging their funds to support that one improvement plan, not, a plan for this, a plan for that, a plan for this other thing, but looking at students overall, and of course staying within the guidelines of each of those funding streams to meet the legal requirements, but being a little more intentional in how they are using funds to really focus on improvement rather than all these little fragmented programs that are taking place with no real, sometimes the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing, and people are going different directions with similar purposes and goals in mind, but not really playing together in the sandbox. Jan?
And our state auditor department from USBE have created an amazing program that can help you identify in your district how every dollar is spent of all your different budgets. And they piloted it with 2 districts, and now they're starting to work with each district individually to do that. I know Ogden, we've been working with them, so we'll be able to see soon how all of our funding, because we have 3 schools on these various lists, and that's the first thing that we're doing is saying, okay, how can we braid our funding effectively, first for these 3 schools, and then for the rest of our schools, so we don't get in this same boat down the road. But it has to be a whole entire effort, but I know our state Board of Education is working in that direction of giving us those tools to be able to do that more effectively as a district.
Oh, thank you, Jan. Because one of the things that will have to be in our report cards in the coming year is financial transparency that's required under ESSA. So the Department of Education gave states a little bit of extra time to develop those systems, but it has to be on all of the LEA and the school report cards about what funding you're receiving, what amount of funding your building's getting. And so we attended some sessions on that as well at the National ESEA Conference. So it's probably kind of what they're working toward.
And I've seen a picture of it from the 2 pilot districts. It's amazing.
Oh, I'm
So
so excited to hear about
It has been the
that.
willingness of districts to come on board originally,
Yes.
and we jumped on it, because we have Rich, Rich,
Yeah.
Superintendent and I, and it's so exciting. So we're close to being able to have it, and so when they reach out to the other districts, I'd encourage districts to jump on board for that. Because they come and they find out all the different budgets that you have, and then they integrate it in and then kind of share the reports with you. It's
That's
absolutely
really
amazing.
exciting. And the other thing that's really helpful with that, for schools that are in improvement, the district has to be at the table. So these little schools are not these isolated little islands where, you know, they're kind of off on their own and these other things might be taking place at a district level, but the district has to look at, okay, how are we using our funding? Are we differentiating support to our neediest schools? Are we treating all of our schools the same, which is not really effective? So I think there's some things coming, you know, out of this, all of this work that will be very positive as we move forward. So
And one little note too, because we had a school that came out
yeah.
recently, and a school that was in another level, but showing enough progress, you have to continue the support that is making it so they're out of it now. You can't say, okay, great, you made it, the funding's gone now. So you
Yeah.
have to be able to continue to support that in those efforts that are key and essential to their progress. Because they can't be expected to do it all.
So important. Thank you, Julia. So,
Just a question on funding. So right now we have SB 149, Milner's bill, that's the teacher and student success account, where the money's going to be filtered down to the schools directly. Will they be able to, with these turnaround, is there any tie-in? Has anyone worked with her to tie in to make sure that
We haven't, and it's a really good question. Specifically, one of the intents of both of these pieces of initiatives is that they start with a needs assessment and root cause analysis. So all of these schools have been identified in one form or another for low performance. So the root cause analysis really gets at why is this happening? Why is this the thing that is bringing the school's overall performance down? And so that's where this, we start taking a look at what resources are available that we can implement in the school to address that. So though we haven't had that conversation yet, when we get to the point where we have results of root causes and that's a piece of it, we will want to access that and align it.
And how can you support the district so that the plans are going to be developing these frameworks, given that this bill passes, they'll develop the framework so that we make sure we're not, we have all these multiple plans. I think right now there are 4 plans, now you add a turnaround plan, now we're going to add a teacher and success.
That discussion's happening, and
Yeah.
there was a brief discussion with Jennifer Thrombson's group about that though yesterday, and I raised the concern that we would have to make sure that those plans are aligning.
yeah, they have to be
And that-
aligned.
We should be funding our plans, not funding our funds, right?
Yes.
And I've been trying to make the case, we've had some success with it, that if you're a school identified for turnaround or federal school improvement, you're one of the low-performing school. That plan should take precedent. Everything else should be in support of that particular plan. So we've had some success in those conversations there.
Max, one thing that we were looking at is we're looking to refine our district-wide school plan template. We were going to use as a guideline the school improvement plan template to make sure all those elements were in our district template that we're using in all of our schools, so then all of our schools have the same elements that are effective. So then we were going to then come to the team and say, here's what we propose, everything's in there, can we just all have the same format? So then we're meeting the needs. So that's one thing that districts can do as well, instead of thinking in separate, making sure those elements are there, starting with that. Because we have 3 schools in that boat, using that as a guideline and then building up from there. So then that way, we're thinking that we'd be better off not getting schools in that same boat as well, because they're working on the same type of elements, looking at the same criteria that we're expecting our school improvement schools to.
So proactive.
Did we find,
Was there an online question?
She actually found it in the information, so.
at this point, do we have an aggregated report of saying what the most common findings are, the most common root causes of the issues?
Well, probably not yet, but the other thing is, the reason that we have, or we necessarily did this, the actual state statute and the federal statute actually get at these things, that a lot of these things emphasize, and comprehensive needs assessment and root cause analysis, is that context matters. What is good for one school and specific to their root causes of low performance may not be the same for another school. So we really emphasize that it's, it's very localized to that school.
The reason I pose that question, one of my responsibilities is to conduct supervised on-site reviews at high schools. And I'm part of the data that I'm asking them to share with me what the EL enrollment is in special education compared to the EL enrollment across the board. And the EL enrollment in special education is anywhere between double to quadruple that which is found with the regular population. So I'm sure that somehow that's impacting on performance as well.
I'm sure.
Thank you. Sometimes what we found is that schools don't have, vertical and horizontal alignment throughout the system. Sometimes teachers really aren't teaching the standards. They're teaching to a textbook or kind of doing their own thing. And so they may have a large population of students who are English learners, and they're not really addressing the needs of those English learners. They're just treating them like, what's good for one child is good for every child, and so they aren't getting that additional support that they need.
I would agree.
Those are some of the common kinds of things that we see.
I would say one of the most common reasons and causes is quality and effectiveness of Tier 1 instruction.
Yes.
And the second is your school culture.
Yes,
Yep.
those are two.
Yeah, and those are two of those domains. And then the other one is leadership and
Yes.
talent management. But it almost always comes down to quality of Tier 1 instruction. That's where we've seen it as ourselves, just as our small district.
Yeah, we've seen that a lot too. We'll see schools that are in improvement and they have like interventions from A to Z, but they haven't addressed Tier 1 instruction. But they just keep
Tier
buying
1
more and
systems.
more published intervention programs, and pretty soon, teachers will say, oh, well, we have this, we have this, we have this, we have this, we have this. But you go in and the Tier 1 instruction is not adequate to meet the needs of the kids.
And your Tier 1
So-
behavior or social
Yeah.
emotional learning systems, that
Yeah.
it comes down to your Tier 1. That's why I would just say, after 30 years of education here in Utah as a leader,
Yeah,
It's
you can't
Tier 1.
intervene your way out of it.
yeah, it's just Tier 1.
I'm sorry. Because I spent 3 years in the charter section here, I wonder, what types of extra support are they getting, and how are we building their capacity, because they don't have a large district behind them to help them move, through this and to stay implementing these things. And so I'm curious about that.
I'll tell you this much, we have become pretty good friends with our charter crew here in this office now. So that's kind of a start. I'll just give you an example of one thing that we learned that we didn't know. Just in state turnaround, there was a change between the first iteration of the bill and the second, in that the funding in the second version of the bill goes directly to the LEA, who conducts the RFP and contracts with their providers. Well, we had in cohort 2, 4 of the 5 were charter schools. And so we told them, this is the requirement, this is what you have to do. They have no infrastructure to do that. They didn't know how to do it. So there are things that we're learning moving forward. So we're trying to work pretty carefully with our charter crew here, and then get feedback from the schools that are in turnaround who will be identified for federal school improvement to try to identify what those unique needs would be and then respond to them. Because as I said, really the intent of both of the bills is to identify what is specific in the context of each school and then provide for that. So in a broader scope, it becomes a bigger issue. So we're trying to, rein in as many people and agencies here as we can to address those issues. But it's going to be an ongoing thing that we just learned.
Become good friends.
We get a
with
phone
Zach
call every day that
Christensen,
teaches
too.
us something new.
So he's gonna help train.
They're such a great group that just want to do the right thing, and,
Yeah.
lacking that capacity as far as numbers, so
But yeah,
I'm excited.
when Michael Clark sees us now, he runs. So that's a good
Towards
start.
us.
Towards us. Right.
Yeah, towards us. Any other questions?
What is the funding gonna look like for both programs?
So I'll speak to state turnaround. State turnaround is $7 million per year ongoing. And then for ESSA, it's a portion. So what the actual statute says is it's 7% off the top of our Title I allocation, 95% of that 7% is supposed to go to schools. Now, we've had some issues in that the economy has gotten better in Utah, so we've received fewer Title I dollars. So we've had to implement a hold harmless so that schools that are Title I, so they receive their proportionate amount. So it's decreased the amount we have available for school improvement.
Yeah, so in a nutshell, we were able to set aside 7% in last fiscal year, but this current fiscal year, because of the hold harmless that had to kick in for the LEAs, we were not able to set aside the full 7%. So our allocation was actually cut down almost by half. And that's impacting states across the country. For example, our colleagues in Oregon, the first year were able to set aside $10 million. The second fiscal year, they only have $4 million.
Ouch.
And my colleague in Kansas, they set aside $7 million last year. This year, they have $1 million. So Utah was one of the states hit hardest last federal fiscal year because our population, our percentage of students who are identified under the federal definition of poverty is one of the lowest in the nation, statewide. So our Title I allocation overall dropped from $87 million to last year it was $81 million. So that's just, we have a strong economy, which is wonderful for our state, but it also impacts the amount of federal education funding that we receive. Yes.
Sorry for being late, and if you've already addressed this, Max, I apologize. I am concerned about accuracy of data. I know that we've sent some emails back and forth, and you've been great. We are constantly finding that the data, it's not what we've put in. So I understand we're responsible for what we're putting in, but what's coming out is not accurate. So how are you dealing with inaccuracy of data?
That's another section in the agency we've become really good friends with, is data and statistics. As you know, we have this year a new state accountability system. There are a lot more indicators involved with that data. There was quite a transition period. So at this point, the best thing we can do moving forward with the new state accountability system is identify those things, go back and work with data and statistics to identify what the issue was, to document it, and then moving forward try to correct anything.
So what do you want schools to do that have been identified as TSI or CSI that we feel were inaccurately identified based on data? What do you want their procedure to be?
Aaron Bro.
Yeah.
So you don't want us to go through you?
You can, but
we'll
we
end
have
up
to pass
sending you to
that.
him because he
Yeah.
has all of the data and can
He's the
speak
director
more
of data and
deeply
statistics.
to it.
We'll be happy to go directly to him.
I'm happy to talk to him as well. On your behalf, Your Honor.
If for some reason, I'm not saying, but if for some reason it doesn't seem to go anywhere, what would you, does the school just accept? I think it's going to make it difficult for you to hold a school responsible when it's based on inaccurate data. So I think it puts you in a no-win situation.
I would agree. First, we start with Aaron Bruck to take a look at that data, but ultimately the decision on the identification or the required actions moving forward of that school would have to go to the superintendency. I think that's probably where a final decision would be made. But I mean, again, we want to hear these things because to move forward accurately.
That's the intent, and I think.
And some of those things are just small things, like, we can look back at October 1 counts and show that there were no homeless kids, but then they're being identified based on homeless.
So I believe, and maybe we had that conversation that you thought the H code that stood for homeless, but it does not. It stands for Hispanic.
But yeah. No.
Okay. Well, that letter hasn't gone out to LEAs indicating what the codes are, but I did receive an email about that.
That wasn't from us.
Misunderstanding. Okay.
Yeah, but Kim, that communication is gonna be really important, so we want to hear it.
And
We
you guys
don't-
have been great.
we- yeah,
I mean,
we
I
need
have no
to hear it.
complaints about your office.
But then, you know, when I walk out, then.
Yeah, no, I just
We
think it's
understand.
inaccuracy of data that we've been dealing with for a long time, and some of it's input data, absolutely. But,
Great question, yeah, that's so, yeah, you can go directly to Aaron Ruff to work to those issues, or you can keep
And
contacting us.
CC us on it, so
Yeah.
that we know,
Yeah.
and then we're staying in the
Keep
loop.
us in the loop so we're aware
Yeah.
and able to help advocate and check in. to see what's
Online
going on.
question?
Yeah, there's a comment here from Daniel about Tier 1 instruction and DSL instruction. Tier 1 instruction is so important, but often DSL instruction is ignored. Tier 1 instruction alone will not teach the language the way students need. Those are my comments. DSL instruction often becomes a hoop to jump through.
Yes, and we'll let Christelle address more of that, of what she's seeing is she's going out doing the Title III on-site visits. But before we go any further, we had some people that joined us after we'd done introductions. So Kim Dorr is here, she's representing charter schools. Sandra Grant is a specialist on our team here at USBE, and Deidre Straight is here. She represents parents as well and secondary students.
Deirdre.
Deirdre, okay. And so she joins us as well. Did I catch everyone else that came in? I think everyone else was here and had a chance to introduce themselves. So
Thank you for all of your work on this. I mean, I can't even imagine how the intricacies of 2 different programs and
Oh,
training and all that,
we
so.
will be in touch.
So,
I'll be taking you up on that.
that's right, we appreciate everything that you've been doing, that's helpful to watch.
yeah.
Did you want to address that expiry?
That's over that, so.
Yeah, do you want to?
Sure, and I'll need the details, so you will be the resource of the details. So essentially, and Becky touched on this, so last year, under statute, we were required to reserve 7% for school improvement. However, we didn't identify schools under ESSA for school improvement until this year. So we had a chunk of change that we set aside that is going to expire September 30th, 2019. And when I say chunk of change, it's 3-point-something million.
$3.2 million.
So one of the things we wanted to talk about is, so it's now March tomorrow, $3.2 million that must be encumbered by September 30th, 2019. We need to, we pulled some of those things out to conduct the comprehensive needs assessments in those schools and the root cause analysis. And there are 33 of those schools identified. So that's going to be a monumental piece of work. But then we have still the rest of that money. So one of the things we wanted to discuss with you and get some feedback and some input is effective uses of those funds.
So we do want to allocate, some funding out to LEAs that have those CSI schools that have been identified. But we also want to make sure that the funding can be used, and otherwise, if the funding expires on September 30th and it hasn't been, spent, districts have some time after that to claim those funds through a reimbursement request. Those funds otherwise revert back to the United States Treasury, which is then a ding against Utah saying, we give you the least amount of funding in the nation, and yet you're sending money back to the Treasury. So obviously, you either don't know how to manage your money, or you don't really need the money that you're getting. And it triggers audits, it triggers all kinds of things from the Federal Department of Education. But it was something that was out of our control because, we have new assessments in science, so that delayed all the data. Then data and statistics kept going back and forth, rerunning the data to try to make sure they were identifying the correct schools. So it's just delayed everything to the point now we're almost at the end of the school year. So some of the things that we've proposed is perhaps allocating funds to LEAs and providing some sort of opportunities for school teams to engage during the summer and having LEAs then, pay teachers and administrators for additional time that they would be putting in, working on their plans, getting things geared up and ready for the coming school year, compensating them for that work, because we know they work incredibly hard, and they never get recognized for that. And we know our salaries in Utah are low. We have the highest class sizes, and I think we've got to start paying attention to that. We're losing a lot of really good people in our state because they just get burned out, and they never get recognized. They never get thanked. They never get, any kind of, monetary compensation. So we know that those schools will be developing those plans once we have the root cause and need assessments done. But what are your thoughts about it? And I'm really glad because Heidi's here as a school principal, JM has been a principal, Debbie's a principal, we have others that, Chuck has been a school principal, Leslie's worked in administration and in charter schools. What would you think would be reasonable and feasible that we can target that money for? We don't want people just going out and buying a million computers or iPads, or a ton of Title I money goes into that, and we don't see sometimes any results from it. Debbie?
One thing I would say is that it is hard during the school year when teachers are deeply embedded in working with the kids in the classroom. At the end of the day, they're tired.
Yes.
To try and ask them to come together on a Friday, they are. It's hard to deal with that. To have some time in the summer to come together, to collaborate, and to be recognized monetarily for that time that's given is very helpful, with some flexibility of how they can do that. It doesn't, you don't have to set like just 1 week where they all come together, but maybe in teams, that they would be able to have that flexibility, because we are now heading into a time when they've already made arrangements for some time off or to go and do something, but if teams came together at different times, as long as it could be documented, I think it's a great time. Hopefully we would have all the data also for end of the year tests, that they could then look at that and have a better understanding moving together.
Thank you. Other comments?
I would agree, because we are in this situation. We're also moving to a new building.
Oh, yay.
So a lot of things are happening right now, but the teachers are, they want to be doing some backward planning and we're making changes on teams, other things at this point of the year. I think it is nice when we can acknowledge them and their expertise and give them time and professionals around them to help guide and get them through it.
I'd like to also echo that, but also ask that it also include professional development, because especially as they're creating these plans, then if they could do some planning of professional development before the kids come on the instructional strategies and things, so then we don't have substitutes in the buildings, and they can hit the ground running day one, that would be a good combination. And then I'd also like to if possible, to include time for home visits, if some of them include that in their plans, because when the sites that have been doing those non-conventional and home visits that aren't, like your kid's not doing well, we have seen a huge impact from that. So I think if they include those 3 elements, the schools will be very appreciative, especially since the timeline then needs assessments won't be done until just school gets out. They don't have much time to go from there.
We're at such a tight time. So I think those are really great. And I hope that teachers would be, and principals and others would be compensated at their regular rate of pay, not a stipend, not $30 an hour to put in that kind of time when they're really engaged and working hard, that they be compensated, at the rate of pay that they should receive. Otherwise, I think it's sometimes demeaning to people. So those are excellent. Max is taking notes. Becky will be together the minutes. Other comments, Jeannie?
I'm wondering, again, in supporting grading funding and looking for ways to fund what they're doing, if they've set priorities in their plans, that if they're receiving additional funding, obviously it has to be aligned with that. But where are other funding sources that they're getting money? How is this coming together with it? And then when they do come together with this professional learning and whatever it is, PLCs and teaching them how to do PLCs, so they're using that time wisely, et cetera, that it's all done based on evidence-based practices.
Yes.
And I think that's something that we really have to make sure is happening and that we're looking at. And we really have to be pushing tier 1 level of evidence, not just allowing anything. And that would, put a little weight on the USBE to make sure that, that that's happening, that we're providing those types of things, but that's kind of our job. And so I would just recommend that we really make sure that any way that we're helping them, that we're teaching them, building capacity on how to make sure that they're using evidence-based versus research-based, yada, yada.
Thank you, Jeannie. We have 5 half-day sessions on evidence-based, how to identify and select evidence-based practices. Those will be presented by staff from WestEd. That's March 26th, 27th, and 28th. So there are 5 half-day sessions, a morning and afternoon on the 26th, morning and afternoon the 27th, and then just the morning on the 28th. The registration for those sessions are open in the MIDAS professional learning system here at USBE. Teachers are welcome to attend that. Principals, anyone that is interested in attending those. We're capping each group off at about 50 people so that it's a manageable group. And the West End, they're bringing a team of 4 people that can then facilitate and walk around. We're asking people to bring a computer. They're going to get them into some databases. Have them look at some of their own individual data. And so people on this committee as well are more than welcome to attend if you're interested in that, in supporting that. And Barbara?
Just a quick question. Some of these schools that I identified are very isolated, like Ivanpah.
Yes.
Are they getting additional funds because of their isolation, so they need this support they need, or is this would that be a source with this extra 3? A piece of that gives them, it's just so hard to get the support they need. They're so isolated.
Right?
Yeah, Ivanpah's in, I think they're in state turnaround. So because of their distance, they'll receive an initial allocation that's under rule of $270,000. That money would be used to conduct the RFP and contract with their provider and develop the plan. Then there are remaining funds that the rule explains must be used to address the identified needs in the school. So their ongoing needs, what were the needs or additional needs, and then those funds will be up for application.
Okay.
So it could take into consideration their isolation.
Yeah.
We've got a couple like that, Navajo Mountains and others.
Thank you. Any other comments before we move
With
on?
your building out there, do they have a working relationship with the tribe there, since the tribe is just right down the road? Getting their input in terms of
that would be, it seems it would be a great idea. It would be really logical and rational if they did. You and I have talked about this kind of extensively in regards to, Ivanpah and other schools like that. It would probably be a really good recommendation to any agency we send out there to work in the school that they do. It would make sense. But I don't know if they do now.
Is the tribe work really organized out there?
well, I think if you have the correct people at the round table, you get something. You get something because it's a small tribe.
It is.
And it's the leadership there it's changed. They're a little more into the educational arm right now, so I think that would be a good opportunity.
Yeah, For any of you that aren't familiar with Idaho Elementary, it's located on the Goshen Reservation out in the West Desert past Wendover. So, very isolated location.
70 miles south of Wendover? Yeah, right on the Nevada-Utah border. Really out of the border. It's truly a two-room.
What distribution are you looking at? You're looking at formula, are you looking at possibly need/application of showing that type?
That's the second one.
Okay.
I think for this first initial funding, it's pretty much going to have to go out by formula.
Yeah.
And then once plans are developed, we'll have funds from this current fiscal year that will expire in September of 2020. We can then look at those plans and determine additional needs that individual schools might have, and then we'll award additional money. But I think this initial amount of money is we have to get that out there fairly soon. And they won't have school plans to submit to us before that.
And who are you sending that initial money to?
It will go to the LEA. We don't
Yeah,
ever,
no, I meant, is it the CSI group, the church?
the CSI group.
Okay, not the TSI.
No, we don't have enough funding to
Yeah,
support.
that's all I wanted to clarify.
Support, yes,
Okay.
thank you, Kim, that was a very good question. So yeah, the schools that are identified for turnaround are supported under the state funding from the state turnaround legislation. The schools identified for CSI, and some of those, somebody asked if schools were on both lists, and there were some schools that were turnaround and also CSI, but if they landed in that bottom 3%, they are in turnaround, they get their funding through the state. If they're in the bottom 5% of Title I schools, or they have the low graduation rate high schools, they will receive funding through the federal funding streams. So I'm trying to leverage that, but we do not have adequate funding to support 330 schools that are in targeted support. So.
But we could use some more time, so if anybody knows how to turn the clock back just maybe 2 months, we'd feel like we're more on track. Thank you for your input.
Yes, thank you, that was very helpful. So I'm going to turn the time now to Christelle, and she'll update us on what's happening in the state for English learners.
So I'm just going to set the context before you even look at the patterns that we've actually seen. And I'm going to depend on JM and, also my colleague from Teaching and Learning, who gave me some really good feedback about the role of visitation and classroom observations. So the intention of the redesign for monitoring visits in Title III was because the peer reviewers, when they reviewed our plan, said, how is the state agency going to ensure that classroom instruction is made comprehensible and English learners have access to grade level content? So that was the question they asked us. And the only way you can make sense of providing the kind of feedback is in relationship to grade level content being accessible for English learners is to get a team of wonderful colleagues from Teaching and Learning in the content areas, and also people who've had experiences as peer reviewers, and then bring that team together. And the point of the monitoring visits is actually connected to the way in which they apply for funds and how that actually functions in the Utah Grants Management System as a way to have this electronic portfolio for all the recommendations and commendations, as well as how they're aligning resources to support the schools that are in turnaround or improvement. So that's the entire intention of how to redesign, how we actually redesigned it based on the feedback we got from the feds. So I'm going to ask you, Jan, to say a little bit about the work that they did on the self-evaluation tool that's uploaded into the grants management system, and the application was really, wonderful example. So maybe you want to say something about that.
What we did is that we asked each one of our building leaders to, with their team, complete the self-evaluation tool, see what their status was. Then we took their information along with our information from our visits and compiled where we are as a district. And then after going and participating on a site visit, We then have met personally with every single one of our school leaders. I've created an EL dashboard for them with their history of how our ELs are doing as compared to all the other subgroups in their whole school. And then we actually shared with them the observation tool and had them look at the different elements of good quality tier 1 instruction. And now each site is trying to integrate that into the work that they're doing at their school. So we are using their ELD pullout time because as front loading and trying to have in their PLCs incorporating these effective strategies from this observation tool in their practices of their instruction. We have a long way to go, let me tell you. And in our turnaround school, my whole EL team, well, two people, two teacher specialists and myself, spent 2 weeks with our state turnaround school just recently to do observations with their instructional coach in every classroom after doing some training to find out where they are. They're going to do the same thing with our next 2 sites. So we're differentiating. They get the priority of their time right now, and then they'll also be part of the school turnaround teams as they're going through and writing the plan, so they have that perspective and that voice. So is that what you would need?
Yeah, so this is a great example of changing the way in which LEAs are applying for funds in a grant management system to support their building capacity in relationship to how they understand the law, the evidence they're actually using to show that they are making gains, as well as the questions in the application to help them identify based on data. And of course, when you did the plans, we didn't have the data yet.
Right, we did.
Right, but now they do. And so because it's more systematic in relationship to uploading the final reports, I'll ask Jeannie to say something about that, into the grants management system with a really clear template and expectation of how districts then will respond to the recommendations based on the visits. So when we do the visits, usually we do 3 days, and we go into classrooms, and we always pick the feeder pattern that has the highest number of ELs. So we do it by feeder pattern intentionally, right? And then we have the team go out, they visit, they use the observation tool, and we can email it to you so you can see what the observation tool looks like. And then based on the observations, the USBE and the peer reviewers provide specific commendations for specific teachers. So really recognizing, when we saw some, were you at Backman with me?
Oh, yeah.
We saw some just amazing instruction.
Fabulous.
And now it's going to be a university demonstration site.
They should be.
And so this is the point. The point is to identify, really these promising practices instead of thinking that somebody else has the answer for us somewhere else in some other country or some other state or Texas or California or wherever, because we have amazing teachers doing really extraordinary work.
And one thing I'll add is I just met with my EL team this week because they've done several site visits in addition to those 2 weeks, and they're compiling all their data into a Google spreadsheet. Then we're going to find our commonalities, and then we're going to bring our department head leads from our instructional department and our behavior, social emotional learning, because then we want to make a plan for next year how to integrate it, because they have to stop seeing ELs as a separate subgroup. They need to see tier 1 instruction. So this is a really good strategy for EL learners. And it has a close tie to some strategies we're talking about, behavior systems or instructional practice. How can we integrate that so that we do it at the same time so they see it's integrated and it's not always an isolated training? We want to integrate our PD and our work off of this data and then plan for next year. So as a district, we're embedding it in everything that we do. And then that also leads to integration of grading of resources.
Yeah, and so I think that's the other piece. And Jeannie, you want to say something about the teaching and learning people? Because you haven't been on a team yet, but...
I haven't, and that's one qualification. I did not get the pleasure of doing any of the visits. But I can't tell you how many of my peers came back and were raving about the opportunity and the experience and just loving getting out there and going with a different perspective of content versus strategy, you know, and children. And so I get really emotional about this, I'm sorry.
That's good.
They've taken those strategies that they've learned and they're incorporating those things into the professional learning that they are now giving statewide, offering statewide, any of that support. They now have some visual evidence, at least, and experiential ways that they can support teachers in, I don't like the word delivering, but sharing that content, teaching that content with kiddos. So it's made an impact there. They are dying for follow-up visits to get to go out and see what's happening. They really would, you know, just like to see that. The other thing that came from it is a discussion, and that kind of boiled down to our team in educator effectiveness, was the importance of peer observation and the necessity of not just going to another class, but setting 2 or 3 goals of things that you're going to look at, not bulletin boards, and look for that data, look for what's happening. So it's a teacher that's in a turnaround school, it's a teacher that's a specialist of some sort, especially a principal of some sort, and a mixture of where those peaks come from. But those are really some big pieces that came out of that, and they were just moved, absolutely moved by it.
Thanks. The other thing that is a part of the monitoring visits is I meet with the parents in focus groups. And oftentimes the things that parents say, you know, I actually can't sleep for about a week because it's so horrifying the way many of their children are treated. And then I also meet with instructional coaches the second day, and then on the third day I meet with all the principals in the feeder pattern and the district, all the district personnel. I just came back from one yesterday from Jordan. And the level of honesty in that group was pretty amazing. There was someone from the district level who talked about the nature of systemic change and how intransigent they have been in looking at the way in which they're working more systemically and changing systems instead of doing things they've always done. And the fact that somebody from the district could actually admit that in front of all these principals, you know, and someone who's there for the monitoring visit from USB was really impressive. And I highlighted that and said, you know, thank you so much for your honesty related to that. The other person who from teaching and learning at Jordan from in literacy said another very important thing that most of us either don't know about or aren't clear about. She talked about the relationship of people who are literacy specialists and the gap between people who are working in literacy and their understanding of the ALS department and working in ELD and language acquisition, so that you think that would be a natural kind of connection, but it isn't at all. And the fact that the person in teaching and learning actually admitted this in front of the entire group, because everyone knew it, but typically we never talk about it.
Was that the teaching and learning person from the district?
From the district. So it was really impressive. And I'm just giving you an example. I could give you other examples of such extraordinary teaching that you would be so proud of people dedicated to the profession of teaching in Utah. And specific teachers in high school, it's at the AVID demonstration site at Granite Park Junior High, the parent learning centers, the preschool family centers. You know, we have so much to be proud about, and the reason I'm saying this is it's easy to get depressed quickly. But I wanted to share with you, and I'm sorry about kind of the way I kind of cut and pasted this, and so then when Becky made, a copy for you, it's a little rough. But I wanted you to see systemically how we're trying to focus on where it says monitoring function in the grants management system that's going to be active at the end of March. And I've already uploaded the reports from the previous districts. It's uploaded into the grants management system under monitoring. For further Title III funding, please upload the district's response to the recommendations and how you have prioritized your changes to support the civil rights of English learners for a quality education. That's the other thing in the self-evaluation tool. There's the whole explanation of the indicators for maintaining the civil rights of English learners to a quality instruction. And every single LEA has to assess themselves related to those civil rights. Also, please explain how you disseminated the report and how you recognized exemplary teaching. So if we're giving all these commendations to individual teachers, and then the report actually never gets to the principal or the teachers, that's probably not a good thing. We had a great example with Martin Bates. He responded to me really quickly, thanked me for the recommendations. We did an interview with him and his team related to learning centers. And then he sent it out to the principals and said, here are the recommendations for your school. Please develop a plan and integrate it into the work that you're doing. So he's kind of the exemplar of a very proactive superintendent. So the way the recommendations have been, and of course you don't see the commendations. So the first part is all the commendations for the superintendent, their team, the board, the ALS department, and then all the commendations for all the individual schools with specific recommendations around instructional practices for the schools, never highlighting specific teachers for recommendations or anything like that, but naming specific teachers for commendations, but in the recommendations, generalizing in relationship to patterns, right? So no one is feeling awful or anything like that. So I just gave you this part so we can look at patterns. So the organization of district and LEA recommendations. Recommendations have been organized under two headings. Now, Diana Sedgwick down in Teaching and Learning helped me organize this. Because for one specific district, there were so many recommendations, we couldn't figure out how to organize them in a systemic way that would help anybody because it was so overwhelming. So we decided to put systems change as first, because nothing else can happen if your system is still stuck in the way they've always done things, and then quality instruction. The first one is for effective communication across districts. One of the big things that we found is there's this huge disconnect between what happens programmatically with Title III funds, even braided now that it's an accountability for Title I, and the typical way business administrators are actually in charge of funding with no connection to any understanding of programmatic issues. Now you might think that this is strange and isn't typical, but it is typical. Maybe not in Ogden, because I know you actually, the person who's in charge of Title III actually knows about their funds. But when you have program people having to be totally bombarded and distressed as a business administrator isn't as responsive to them, then it ends up being incredibly problematic, because then they allocate funds the way they've always done, and they haven't connected it to anything about improvement. The other thing we found, I'm not going to go through all this, but I'm just going to give you some highlights. In one district, this goes back to the Tier 1 instruction, and the principals said this, as well as we had tons, I think Leslie, you were in this group where we saw all these initiatives, these 50 million initiatives, and they would get peer reviewed, the teachers would, and there was a list of 15 initiatives in the administrative, and the district people would come in and they would just check them off, you did this, you didn't do this, you did this, you didn't do that, and then they would give it to the teacher. It was talk about being stressed out. So what we tried to say to them is, review and evaluate the effectiveness of each initiative. The principal said this in the focus group, that has been mandated based on the extent to which students learning English are achieving annual growth goals toward English proficiency and academic achievement in mathematics, science, and language arts. Prioritize initiatives based on mitigating teacher burnout, and these are all the things that principals, teachers, and instructional coaches talked about. Teacher burnout, teacher turnover, and the lack of instructional focus, specifically related to Tier 1 instruction. We saw, I know people love technology, but we saw some really egregious use of technology. And so what we said was, evaluate the use of Lexia, Imagine Learning, and other pull-out approaches to mitigate student isolation. We actually saw a classroom that was like great Tier 1 instruction in the 4th grade, and the 2 English learners actually had headphones on during the instruction to be a part of Imagine Learning. So that ends up being distressing. So we put that in about isolation and lack of teaching academic conversation in every subject. We saw this specifically in early childhood, that kids were constantly on one-on-one computers and not really being engaged in developing language development. So these are just some examples. We also focused on the relationship between, I have lots of parent engagement in relationship to, and I've talked to the special ed department here. There's this misunderstanding from district special ed departments that you don't really assess an English learner until they're proficient, which means 6 years down the road or something. And then the other problem is, and the parents recently, and every single group has said the same thing, when they go to an IEP meeting, the ALS department is left out of it, even when their student is an English learner. And they'll say things like, well, we made a literacy goal and so that takes care of it. Okay, so no, that doesn't really take care of it, because part of the problem is the over-identification of English learners in special education. One example someone gave me yesterday was referrals, because the way in which things are communicated to parents, they want the best for their child. So they say, oh yes, we want extra help, but they don't realize they're giving permission to be referred and tested for special ed, right? Because most of the signatures tend not to be translated into the Spanish or whatever, Somali or Sudanese or the other 150 languages. And so this disconnect between special education departments and ALS departments and curriculum departments ends up being pernicious. And then as a consequence, what happens, is the lack of coherence, not to mention the lack of respect and collaboration among teams that could really work effectively together. So these are just some key highlights. We also found some issues around fee waivers that people are still confused about, even though there have been audits about the egregious behavior, not following the permanent injunction. So there's still all of that stuff out there that is not clear. And when you have to actually say a civil right is that English learners have access to gifted and talented programs and early college coursework, but they don't have it, and another reason they're not encouraged is because of the way the legislation and funding is developed doesn't really support rigorous instruction, which is Tier 1 instruction. So these are I'm just giving you kind of general trends that aren't just about one district. It's not about one district. It's pervasive throughout the state. And the only way you really support people in doing that is having observations and conversations and developing relationships and really encouraging them, as well as putting it in a really transparent form like the grants management system, where now it's really apparent to everybody how they're responding based on how they're using resources to address issues for children who are English learners, who are refugees, who are immigrants. So questions?
Comments. I would say bravo for you, Christelle, and your team. I would say that I've not found any district that would not match exactly what you said, even though you've not gone to all districts in the state. I would find there's not one district that doesn't fit into your mold. From a CTE world, which is another part of the world that we need to make sure we have kids progressing in, we're finding the enrollment in CTE is pretty well matching the school average. So doesn't appear to be discriminatory action there. However, the support to teachers is where the problem starts to arise. I remember talking to a counselor just recently. He says, "Why did you ever put this female EL student in this class where the vocabulary of the student was so weak compared to the content of the class? The student was frustrated and was ready to bail out." At the same time that you have teachers in similar classes in other classes, they say, "I have no skill sets to work with EL kids." And so we've got a huge dilemma on our hands where we got all these kids who want to progress but don't have the system to support them. The teachers are frustrated because they don't have the wherewithal to make to work with these kids effectively. So what they come up with is what I call the lazy L. Teacher teaches to the bilingual student talks to the unilingual student, and you get this less than perfect system of how to instruct kids, and that is in virtually every school that I've gone to. So again, kudos on my evidence, separate from hers, would corroborate everything she's saying.
So other questions? I'm surprised you don't have other questions.
Hold on right next to you.
The pattern of having ELs overrepresented in special ed, is that both secondary and elementary?
And we've been working, we have the special ed department come and work with the ALS directors. But again, you have to realize that the ALS directors end up being marginalized in district offices because the curriculum people tend to set the agendas. I'm not saying this because it's a personal bias of mine because I work with the ALS directors. I'm just saying there's actual evidence, and the fact that yesterday in Jordan, people from the district actually said it, I think is pretty indicative of the way in which we think about English learners as not being competent. If you actually looked at the data from gifted and talented programs and saw the discrepancy and the actual barriers that are created to ensure that English learners don't get in those programs, I think you probably would be horrified. There's an internal audit hotline that came in about a month ago that our Refugee Collaborative and other people in the agency with the Attorney General, Assistant Attorney General, are trying to work on to highlight these kind of, initial screening practices, that make it clear that there are certain students who are privileged and have the opportunity for an enriched environment, and then there are other students who aren't. So it's a combination of things.
And you do have to look at that systematically, because for students, their fate is sealed usually by junior high or middle school, because if you're not in a certain class, you are not in that path for the advanced coursework. And that's just how that is. And then it has to be a district systematic approach, because like we just met with our state office team with our literacy team in our district, and we asked specifically, as we're going through this process, can you also bring in, when they're providing us some training that we're participating in, we said, can you also bring with that training the EL perspective? Because we need to integrate that in our plan. And they were so excited to hear that. Oh yes, we don't get that asked all the time. And so you have to systematically integrate it so it's not an add-on later on.
To that end, when I look at these reviews, I look for GPA or class entrance requirements. So like if they have an artificial GPA, what I would classify as a 3.0 and higher. Several schools that I've just recently reviewed, they had that for work-based learning. It says you will cease and desist. They had that from class 1 to class 2, where they had an artificial GPA, which automatically will more than likely screen out more EL kids than others. And so I've asked them to remove those artificial barriers from class 1 to class 2 in a series of classes. So there's lots of things that are going on that really, in my mind, are outright violations of the civil rights of particularly those kids who are weaker in the English language.
Yeah.
So there's lots of internal stuff, just like Christelle was saying, lots of internal stuff that we've got to address.
That's why the board rule, the early college committee has worked on it for 2 years, and the board rule is trying to mitigate all those barriers and those artificial requirements related to who has access and who doesn't, even when students actually go to counselors and ask if they can be in IB classes and are denied the opportunity even though they're motivated. So we're trying to, through board rule and through the early college coursework committee that we've done, is to try to eliminate all those artificial prerequisites that are specifically intended for a certain group of students. Because the accelerated students program, it's connected to money. And so that ends up being a problem.
And to do a celebration that things are changing, because we have IB, and we just newly have IB. We're in the newer family of it, but our site that also has IB, also houses our newcomer. And they were so excited because they had a newcomer come that doesn't speak much English at all, but they could tell from their work that could be an IB. And so they put her in IB.
See, that's an example.
And everyone's coming together to make this work because they saw that potential, and it's starting to shift. But it's a huge mindset change.
I just worry that even with the rule, I mean, you need to have the rule, but we still, you have a mind shift there. A lot of schools don't have that mind shift. So even if you were able to really advocate for that student to get into some of these programs, and I'm really curious about more CTE stuff too, that you just don't have the mindset in a lot of these classes to really make that effective.
And that's why you have to have the data, because we've been pushing at Ogden High that data for the last 2 years of looking at all of their advanced program, all the program, the breakdown, having them have planning about it, talking about it, and it makes a mind shift. They're getting there.
Thank you, Christelle. I have a question. Is this the group or a place to talk about how do we support our BAs, our business administrators, to understand where their LEA is headed? Now, granted, I understand that's ultimately the LEA's responsibility, to help them understand this is why we're using the funding. But I have found that when I actually talk to some of the business administrators through reviewing Title IIA applications, the mere discussion is eye-opening for them to think of it a different way. And so I'm wondering, is there a place in this group, or is that really not anything for us to deal with in helping the LEAs to keep, I think especially the business administrators, because they are the ones that are helping to fund the plans that the LEAs are making, and I can't help but think that that might be something that could help improve the use of those funds.
Well, one strange thing that happened 2 years ago, and it was at the ALS meeting when we were talking about this specific issue, we created a high-risk assessment related to triggering audits, and the ALS people got together and we created a criteria. And so they actually went back, I think you were one of them. Do you want to say what you did?
I shared it with my business administrator, and he goes, "Are you kidding me? It'll trigger an audit?" And I go, "Yes, it will trigger an audit." And I said, "And I'm on the committee that voted it in." And he goes, "Oh, you're killing me. But he's really aware of that. He's trying really hard to shift, and he's seeing how hard it is to even shift the practices of the whole entire district. But it's the audit that got it, because I had lots of conversations before that. Yeah, I make deadlines.
And it might not be appropriate for this group because there is so much to be done.
It's the audit. They don't
just didn't know.
Well, I think we did talk about this at an earlier meeting last year. We were trying to put in place a policy for Title I. And kind of got shot down by some other people here at the agency. But I do think it's a really pertinent topic, and I made a note here that we can have that on our agenda at the next meeting.
And can I just add, it's not anything against a business administrator, it's just like with any other human being. They need to understand what's my skin in the game. And it's for me to change practice, even though it's about kids and everything, everyone's human. So you have to find that trigger to just push them over. And for him, it was the audit. And now I have to tell you, even though he's all in, even though sometimes it's more reluctant, it's hard to change, but he's in with it.
The last 2 years, Ogden's Title IIA, I will tell you, have been completely different than in the past. Completely different. And I'm sure there are many things that go into that. But I would imagine that push back from the...
Well, and also, I'll be honest, our assistant superintendent took over Title IIA, Chad. And so, and then we're all very interdepartmental, we're all working together, all interconnected.
Yeah.
And that's our message, we're all interconnected and interdependent. Like, just to be honest, to make a request for reimbursement with P cards, every P card receipt has to be in district-wide, or the business office can't submit a request. So you could have one receipt out there with none of the budgets involved, but we're all interdependent. And so it's just those little things that everyone's coming on board, and it's slow progress, but it's there. But so I'm glad that you're seeing a change.
So thank you all. I made a note, like I said, we'll put that on the next agenda, because I do think it's really important. Thank you, Christelle, for all that you did.
It's awesome.
So just briefly about Title I monitoring. This year, pilot has been going on, and the request, to our understanding, came from some of the business administrators saying, yeah, that people from the Utah State Board of Education were coming to their LEAs too frequently to do monitoring visits or asking for fiscal backup or documentation. So they said, you know, is there any way you can streamline it? So leadership here asked some of us to work on that, and because our whole division is under Leah Voorhees, who is our assistant superintendent. We're in the student support division. She asked Title I and child nutrition programs are also part of that, our same division, and special education to pilot with some LEAs. So what we did is the groups got together and we looked at LEAs that were on each of those three sections monitoring schedules for this fiscal year. And so we worked with, it turned out that there were 2 rural school districts, one that's sort of maybe a medium-sized district, it's not a really large district, one that we went out to earlier this week that's a very small rural district, and then one charter school that we haven't visited yet. So there have been some pros and cons to that, and we're gathering feedback from those LEAs that have participated about, you know, what their honest feedback is about. Was it helpful? What was helpful about it? If it wasn't helpful, what are some things that created angst on their behalf? So we're not quite sure, the verdict's not quite in on exactly how that's going, but I think for the 2 rural LEAs we visited, some of the just like informal feedback we've received is that it's too much all at one time. And for Title I monitoring, we have to visit some of the schools that are in that LEA. And based on the size of the LEA, it determines whether we visit one school or multiple schools. But the first LEA that we visited, the child nutrition people have to go in and they have to observe breakfast. They have to inspect what's going on in the kitchen. They have to, you know, it's very, very in-depth, and they're under the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Very intense level of monitoring. Are they providing the right balance of nutritional, you know, categories and all this kind of stuff? They have to observe lunch. If the school's doing snacks or after, you know, they have to observe all of that. So it's pretty intense. Special education department has to go into the individual classroom level and look at individual education plans for specific students, and then go into classrooms and into schools to see if what is in that IEP is actually being provided. So again, it's a very invasive, very in-depth look at what's going on. We go in and we're trying to look at how are the Title I funds being used. If the district has a school that's in improvement, we want to see what's taking place there and how's the district supporting that school. If we visit multiple schools, maybe they have a low-performing school, maybe there's a school that's high-performing. What's that school doing differently that's making a bigger difference than this other school that maybe has very similar demographics that isn't doing well? So we're going to gather that feedback, and we can report back at our next meeting about what the outcome of that is and whether that continues, or you know, whether it's really benefiting LEAs, if, you know, how it's impacting staff here. The other thing that we're going to be doing in Title I monitoring is under NCLB. It was very heavy compliance based. So it was checklists of, are you following this requirement? Do you have this thing? Do you have an inventory? But it really wasn't looking at the quality of what was happening with those funds, and were those funds being budgeted based on needs and root causes, and how are those Title I schools performing? Are we just doing the same stuff every single year and getting the same results? Because if we look at Title I as a state, we have some very high poverty schools, like Leafy Elementary, that was a National Distinguished School recently, and we have Spring Creek Elementary in Provo, and this year we have Wasatch Elementary from Davis, Belknap Elementary from Beaver, that are high poverty schools, but their achievement is much better than many other Title I schools in the state. So why is it that some schools are doing that and other schools are getting sometimes a lot more Title I money and things are just not improving? So we're going to be looking more at what quality is coming out of that funding, not just a compliance checklist of, do you have this, 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 this. So we're kind of in the middle of changing things over and trying to educate LEAs that that's what we're going to be doing. Also, because of our state auditors and some of our internal auditors here, we're being asked to really look at a risk-based monitoring system. Right now, it's on a 5-year rotation, so it's just like, oh, Max, you're LEA, you're on the list this year, it's your turn. Jeannie, your turn's next year. You're on the list, we've got this list for multiple years. But if we have LEAs that are not filling out their applications on time, they're not asking for reimbursement requests, like JM was just saying. You don't want to trigger an audit, then get your reimbursement request in more frequently. Do they have audits from their own auditing that's taken place in their districts? And we have information in our finance department downstairs where they collect in all those audits that take place in LEAs across the state. And then they share that information with us. So, you know, what are other sections in our building finding? Are they finding that they're misusing funds or not, you know? So we're going to be moving to that system starting next year. And that may give some people some angst, including some members of our own staff. But we need to move that way. It's the right thing to do, and it's something that we really have to start moving. So we'll be talking to the Title I directors on March 15th when we have our Title I directors meeting. And like I said, there'll be some growing pains. We're certainly not going to jump right in and to be doing things as well as Christelle is doing with Title III. Title I is much more broad. Funding can be used in a much broader way, but we really need to start honing in on how are these funds being used? How are you supporting the schools getting these funds? So that's kind of the direction we're moving. So I just wanted to give this group kind of a heads up, and we'll keep you apprised at each of our future meetings.
Vicki?
Yes.
Going all the way back to the first thing you were talking about.
Yeah.
Tell me again what motivated the piloting? What was the complaint again? I didn't.
Leadership said they received feedback from, and we're not really sure which LEAs the feedback came from necessarily, but and whether it was BAs, whether it was district superintendents, but they said that they were receiving feedback that too many people were coming on site to do various kinds of on-site monitoring. So the district might say, okay, yesterday we had the child nutrition people coming, next week the Title I people are coming, next month Christelle's coming, maybe Jeannie's going out to do Title II monitoring.
And they thought it was better to have them all come up.
So they said, you know, it's too intrusive, it's too disruptive, so that triggered this pilot. And the LEAs that were selected for no other reason other than the child nutrition, special ed, and Title I all have them on their schedule for this year. That's the only reason those specific LEAs were selected.
I'm wondering, was that their solution? I would disagree that there's a whole lot of people coming out. I can absolutely see somebody saying that. But was the solution to have them all come at once, or could there be something that
Well, I think it was just try it and then gather some feedback. So one of the specialists in child nutrition have been really wonderful to help kind of orchestrate and schedule it. But they put together a feedback survey that goes out afterward to the district people that were involved, the school personnel that were involved, and just, said, give us your absolute honest feedback. Did this work for you? Did it not work? What was good about it? What was not good about it? And we're just gonna take their honest feedback and go from there.
Okay.
But we did not visit a really large school district. So we didn't visit a big district like Granite or Alpine or.
I'm just wondering if it was a group of people sitting around going, there's like way too many people coming out.
And that could.
And we really just want you to not come out as much. I mean, you know what I mean?
Yeah, that I don't really know, Kim, because I wasn't.
Yeah, I mean, I can see a group of people sitting around saying that.
Oh, yes.
But I don't know that I would think, I'd say, well, send them all on the same
Yeah.
day. But, interesting, okay.
Yeah, so the thing that happened at the district we visited earlier this week was a small rural LEA. And as it turned out, they only have one Title I school, so we had to visit that campus. We couldn't visit any of the other schools. We were hoping that special ed would have chosen a different school, but they didn't. So child nutrition went to that school, special ed went to that school, so then we come in and they're just like, blah. I mean,
Yeah, I could see.
the district people were not happy. The principal it was pretty overwhelming, but they were very
Those are
gracious
pretty
at the school.
distinct.
Yeah, very distinct.
Interesting.
So anyway.
Thank
Was
you
it
for
ever
clarifying that.
considered by the team to maybe just look at the calendars and stagger? Like, as a whole state, just stagger, so
No,
a
but that
district
makes
get.
more sense.
Yeah.
Or do
But I don't
this,
think
I
that
like this
happened.
monitoring.
Yeah, more risk-based. Christelle?
Yeah, I just want to say, I changed the cycle for 5 years to identify based on a criteria that we all agreed on that would make sense. And then I asked them when they want me to come out, right out, kind of a general, and then they let me know. And if there happens to be, like, I think this happened, I can't remember which district, that special ed had come out, like I think it was with Granite. They'd come out the month before, and I said, oh, well, I'll just rearrange it. So this whole idea of changing the criteria and then making it really the responsibility of the LEA to say what works best for them seemed to work really well for all of us in ALS. I mean, they just decide.
Well, yeah, because we switched from fall to spring because we are having a whole math adoption implementation
Yeah.
next fall.
And she just
And
said,
trying to do that, at the same time, not a smart
Yeah,
idea.
no, too
So
much.
she just readjusted to the spring, same year, just different time.
Yeah, the other
We
thing with
really
Title I
appreciate
is
that,
that for the past many years, it's all been done starting from January to about the first part of May. It's a very tight time frame. It's hard on our own staff because they're gone multiple days during the week. I need to be on more of those visits and I simply can't go as often as I would like to. But we're running out of time and I want to make sure that we will have some time to talk about the new competition that will be coming up for the 21st century competitive grants.
So the purpose of this is to have a discussion about the application for 21st century. We plan to release sometime in March or April. It's a new round of funding, but I want to go over some background information and then some adjustments that will be made to the application. We had a series of listening sessions with current after-school grantees. We partnered with Department of Workforce Services, Office of Child Care to really hear from the grantees because things have changed with after-school. The funding for this particular program was threatened on the federal level. There's a lot of misconceptions about it. So we wanted to listen and how are things going? What are things that obviously there's not certain things we can't change. We have federal and state requirements, but what are things that would be helpful or what are some additional things we can add to really enhance the application? So it's federally funded. It is a competitive grant competition. This year and all the years moving forward, it will be in Utah grants. So this is open to public schools, charter schools, community-based programs like Boys and Girls Clubs, YMCA. So I think that most of the LEAs in the state are in Utah grants, but if you partner with some kind of community-based organization and you know they want to apply, let me know now so we can get them registered. We're all getting used to Utah grants. So we were kind of in the bubble of
Speak for yourself.
We were in the bubble last year with applications, so that's why we operated outside of the system. But this year, that bubble is not available. So everything will have to go through Utah Grant. So we're asking you now, if you know you're interested, you want to apply, if you're a community-based organization, or if you happen to be an LEA who isn't in the system, let us know so we can get that taken care of, because I don't want that to be a barrier for anyone to apply. All of the schools or community-based programs have to be, the school sites, the centers need to be at 40% poverty level. So it's very targeted funding. It should align with the other title programs. If you're in school turnaround or school improvement, we ask that you align your after-school program, aligns and supports that. We don't want you to have a separate plan for after school, because this is intentional funding to support what you're doing during the school day. That's what 21st Century is all about. Supporting what is being done in the school day, increasing parent engagement, really building relationship with the community so they feel like at the school or the community center they can go there and they know they can get the support they need. So that's the focus of the funding. So just some of the grant requirements. It is a 5-year grant cycle. The minimum grant application is $100,000. To try to build in sustainability, the grant reduces to 75% of the total annual allocation in year 4. In year 5, there's a 50% reduction, but during those 2 years when there's decreases, the level of service must be maintained at the initial level. So we encourage people to find other types of funding or partnering with community-based organizations to try to bring in services. So there's really 2 types. When we consider 21st Century, we have our new grants, which is what we're currently seeking applications for, or will be in the next couple of weeks. And then continuation grants, which are those grantees in years 2 through 5 of the cycle. So just some requirements for this grant program. If you are awarded a grant, you do have to participate in the federal reporting system. It is called 21 APR, so it's around participation data and also connecting participation data with state outcome data, so using the state assessment. So that is a process. So that's why we do have community-based organizations who receive this funding, but they need to have a strong partnership with their public school district, their charter school, so they can get this data, because that's essentially how we measure the effectiveness of this program. They're looking at that data, they're looking at the state assessment data. So you have a document in your packet. It's a pink colored document that goes over information about this data, the federal reporting system. So just good to know if you're a school or a charter school who's interested in applying, or you know, a community-based organization. Oh, it's printed in pink. Pink and purple. We also do require periodic program evaluation, both internal evaluation as well as external, so contracting out with another agency to see, are you meeting the goals and outcomes that you set in your proposal. So our federal partners like flexibility, so it's periodic. So we don't say you need to do one every year or you need to want to do every 2 years. It's determined by the program. So that's a key component, as well as agreeing to participate in technical assistance, self-assessment observation. We contract out with a nonprofit, the Utah After School Network, to provide those resources, because we have a very small team to support after school. So we want these programs, as mentioned by Dr. Donaldson, to be quality, to be intentional, not to be operating outside of what is already going on, but how can these enhance what's happening in the school, what's happening in the community. And then, of course, there will be monitoring based on risk assessment. Previously, monitoring was in years 2 and 4 of the grant cycle, but we're moving towards risk-based monitoring, which will be discussed next school year. So if you're interested to see who's currently funded, with which districts, which charter schools, which community-based organizations, you can go to our website and you can find that information, and I'll send that link out. So you can also find the previous application, just more resources about this grant program. So the upcoming competition, expected release timeline is in the next 2 to 4 weeks, so that is coming. We'll have a letter of intent. We'll have a pre-proposal or bidders conference where you can come and ask questions. But again, everything will be done in Utah Grants. You also have instructions about entering your application in Utah grants. So you have the instructions now if you are interested, because it is, it's a process. So our estimate currently, as of a couple days ago, is a little over $5 million. So how the process works is first we fund all of our grantees in years 2 through 5. That is our first focus with our funding allocation. And then any remaining funds we'll use for new grants. So this year I anticipate about $3 million in new funding that will come available. We don't have a cohort in year 2. There was a year that we withheld funding, or we gave the funding in a supplemental grant, so we didn't have a new grantee cohort. So we'll always have that until that cycles out. So we'll always have, for the next 2 to 3 years, about $3 million to give out in new grant funding. So these are the adjustments to some of the application, aspects of the application that's come from feedback from our after-school practitioners. We have these listening sessions, and then also some requirements that we need to put in place. So we have priority points. That is a critical part of the application. Often it comes down to 3 or 4 points, and these additional points can make a difference. So we really wanted to clarify and have different amount of priority points for different questions. So maybe SNAP will have 3 points, whereas if you're a CSI or TSI school, that's 5 points. So some differences in that with the priority points. And then also clarifying if the priority points apply, because with 21st Century you can apply for up to 8 sites under one application. So of those program sites that you're applying for, how many of those need to meet the requirements of the priority point? So further clarifying that, so when we're going through our competitive review process and there's no oh, well, should we give them the points or should we not? Making that clear up front that you need to have all of the sites that this priority point applies to, or it only needs to be one program site. So just clarifying that. And then, of course, adding CSI and TSI schools to receive priority points, and encouraging schools that are within those classifications to align their plans, not have separate plans, but really align how does after school enhance that. And then adding priority points for organization or program sites that have never received 21st Century funding. So new people who this is a big process for them, especially some of our rural districts. That's big, can be a big obstacle. So adding priority points for that. So just within the application, this has been a big topic at the state board around program fees. And as I've been going out and visiting programs, you need to have a sliding fee scale, and you need to have access so all students can participate. I know fees are connected to sustainability for these programs, but if you have kids for whatever designation they are and they need to participate in after school, you can't not let them participate because they can't pay. So that's been a big push. You need to have a sliding fee scale, and it needs to be clear to parents, teachers, community partners about if kids can't pay, families can't pay, what are the options for that they can still participate. So that's something we're adding and emphasizing, that needs to be clearly stated. And then we'll have specific programming requirements for program operation. Right now it's been really loose in terms of how many hours they're operating during the week, how many weeks they're operating during the year. So clarifying that and looking at research, typically it's 15 hours a week where we're going to see impact. Kids need to have the program open at least that long, to where we're really going to see impact and see impact for academics. So we're adding some specific program operations.
Is it for the Questor staff? What is this address and gave me?
Oh, no. That's the
That's not us.
assessment group, technical assistance.
So
I'm not sure.
an additional thing we're adding
It says
is
Route 241, so.
specific requirements for professional development and training. So we think it's key that these staff who are working in the after-school programs, if they're working, if those staff are working in the after-school program at school, or if it's a community-based partner coming in, they really need to have professional development. It needs to be intentional. You can't just say, well, you're going to go through this packet and then you can work with the kids in the program. We want it to be strategic. We want it to be aligned. So we need to put in certain requirements to have that. Also emphasizing evidence-based practices. not just being so loose, but being very clear with what those are going to be, why they are being selected, why it meets the needs of the population you're serving. Adding a logic model to help determine, okay, what are the measures, what are the outcomes, tying it all together is, I think, is good for the applicant, but also on our end when we're visiting those programs, so we can clearly see that, like, okay, this is why you're using this evidence-based curriculum. It relates to this outcome. So adding the logic model, adding the gap analysis. This is competitive funding. We can't fund everyone. We don't have that money. So we want to see what other funding sources they're using, how they're using some other maybe state or federal funding sources to support after school. And then we need to align with, we're using Utah grants now, so whatever the district planning tool is, we're redoing that on our end as a team. So we will have a question about that, making sure that use of these funds is aligned with use of the other Title I funds. And then we're consolidating some program components and adding prevention topics. So just not having as much narrative, but really consolidating and having very specific program components and prevention topics. And with the rubric, we want to increase alignment to the question. So all of the applicants will receive a rubric, and it's often that they might not really compare the rubric with their application, but we encourage that, so we're trying to increase that alignment. So it's clear if how you're going to be scored on this question. And then adjusting the rubric to better measure goals, measures, and outcomes. That can be hard to capture. We're working with some partner agencies to refine that, because it's hard to say, okay, this is the question, but how are you going to be reviewed and scored? So working to refine that process. So that's just in a nutshell some of the adjustments that will be added to the application. I welcome if you want to email me or call me. We can set up a meeting, any other additional feedback you have from this committee. Yes, it can support summer.
Okay, I want to thank all of you again. Any other questions that anyone has at this point in time?
Anything I can do for you guys?
We're planning a tentative meeting in June. I've listed some possible dates. I just looked on our meeting room availability here in this building, which is sometimes pretty difficult. And we've got several people that weren't able to be here. So what I will do is send this out. But is there a date there that works, doesn't work? I can send out maybe an email to people and find out which date works best. Possibly the 19th, 20th, 21st.
I just need a system when I'm running late, because when I call, like 10 minutes before, they send it to voicemail. I know you guys are already getting, so then when I ask if somebody at the desk could maybe give them a message, they send it to voicemail.
That's not helpful.
So maybe a text number I can just text and say,
I can do it mine.
okay.
Yeah.
Not that I plan on being late again, but at least I like to give you notice.
Well, yeah, you don't always know what's happening with traffic or all kinds of
So I apologize, but you know, I took her name.
So, are you, if you want to know days that don't work good for Pam? Is that what you're asking?
19th, 20th, 21st.
I've got You're good on those?
Yeah. Any one of those days.
So I think there's an assessment and accountability group that will be coming in. They've got their technical assistance committee or something. People here from the National Center on Assessment are here working with assessment accountability. I will send out an email and just have you weigh in on if any of those things work or don't work, and then we'll get a meeting. One of the things we need to talk about our next meeting is Jeff Ojeda was not able to be here today because there were issues taking place in one of our LEAs regarding homeless students who are being denied meals being denied access to school. So he's out meeting with that LEA and trying to straighten out all of that stuff that's happening with students that qualified for services under the McKinney-Vento homeless education. So that will be on our agenda next time because he wanted to address that one. Thank you all again for being here. We're so grateful for your time, your energy, your input into things.
Not
Really
living in your car.